All right.
All right, take it away, guys.
Okay. I guess we'll start off, introduce ourselves. I'm Calvin Ma. I graduated 2020, so this past year, and I majored in computer science and statistics, and I minored in econ. And I am currently a software engineer at the Goldman Sachs. Who's next?
Hey.
We'll pop over to Simran.
Oh, okay. I can do that. Cool. Hey everyone, I'm Simran. I graduated 2020, studying comp sci. I'm currently in Durham at a startup.
Your audio
Your audio just cut off.
Oh, did it? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Studied computer science. I'm in Durham right now at a startup called Zogo Finance. It's a Duke student started, found up. We're pretty small. Have about 7 full-time employees, and so we're right here in Durham.
Cool.
You can popcorn over to somebody.
Hey everyone, I'm G. I was class of 2020, so I graduated with these folks. I'm currently a data analyst at Robinhood. Yeah.
Harry?
Did you kick me?
Did you call him Eric?
What? No. Harry, go ahead.
What?
Oh, we're introducing ourselves.
Oh, hi. Okay. Hi, I'm Harry, and I graduated with a degree in stats and CS, and now I work at a financial consulting company as a consultant, and I'm also part-timing the new Masters of FinTech program at Duke. So, yeah, that's me.
All right, and I guess we'll move right into the presentation. So we're here to talk about FinTech.
Awesome. So, for those of you who are like new to FinTech or like want to know what it is, first of all, so FinTech is, as the name suggests, is kind of like an intersection between finance and technology. So examples of like things that fall under finance include verticals anywhere from banking to investing, insurance, tax, and accounting. And then technology is, kind of like what we know from more of the software side of things. So it's combining these two sectors and putting it into like this new whole thing called FinTech. And some of the buzzwords or these acronyms, DAD, kind of like showcase how basically the TLDR of FinTech is that it tries to like use technology to disrupt the financial industry, which some of the examples I talked about earlier, but these are often very old, and a lot of the processes in the finance industry are very archaic. So yeah, cool.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so going off DADs, like there's a lot of different sectors that kind of encompass where the fintech industry is going into. Like we all know like all the crowdfunding pages that are going on right now. So that's a really good example of stuff that they're doing. And other big ones are kind of like trying to change the way loans are issued and taken out. So there are a lot of companies right now in the fintech space that are trying to assess like new ways to give out loans because the current credit system is like pretty lacking and like isn't always like that coherent. And like asset management payments, like these are things that have been going on kind of like as the finance industry has been improving through tech wise, but like for the most part, fintech kind of just like goes off the dad's thing. It's trying to like improve the current systems that exist. Not necessarily disrupt every time, but in some cases, yeah, especially if the existing structures are pretty archaic and they're like kind of taking advantage of you almost. Like a good example is like how there's a lot more freedom to access your like 401ks or like your retirement portfolios, because previously like people that manage those charge like obscene fees to basically do nothing and just move money around occasionally from like trust A to where fund A to fund B. And so like in those cases, like technology is disrupting how that worked before. So yeah.
Yeah, and so here you can see how there are a lot of kind of what Harry talked about, a lot of different sectors and categories of fintech. And so I'm just going to run through these and just talk about some examples. So in payments, you have payment processing, money transfer, mobile payments, Forex, which is foreign exchange, credit cards, prepaid cards, rewards programs. So these are what you see that like a lot of banks are starting to get into payments, where you have like mobile banking apps where you can transfer money, where you can pay off your credit cards. There's a lot of rewards programs with a lot of credit cards. And then the next one is insurance, which is like broking, underwriting, claims, risk tools. So in insurance, there are a lot of like mathematical models. There's a lot of just like data that can be harnessed in insurance to help these companies better like price their insurance, probably like most likely make it cheaper for people, stuff like that. In planning, there's personal finance, retirement planning, enterprise resource management, tax, budgeting, compliance, storage. So that's a pretty wide range of different areas where fintech is used. And so Simran's startup is in that area. There's also crowdfunding or lending, which are these different platforms. There's peer-to-peer lending, mortgages, corporate loans. Blockchain is a big one that's been popular for many years now. And so that includes digital currency, smart contracts, payments via blockchain, asset tracking. And then there's also trade and investments, which is like robo-advisory. So you see a lot of big asset managers like Vanguard, Fidelity. They offer robo-advisors that harness like machine learning, automated investment advice for people. There's trade pricing, algos, brokerage, that stuff. And data and analytics, there's big data, there's machine learning, predictive analysis, just in the whole wide spectrum of finance can leverage these tools. And finally, in security, where there's digital identity, authentication, fraud management. And so that's an extremely important aspect of fintech, where everyone wants their money to be secure and safe. And so security is a huge area in fintech. And so I talked about these a little bit, but here are just some of the technologies that are being used or starting to be used in fintech. And so some of them are more classic. So you have cloud computing, API movements. These are just more classic where you'd see at any other company. And then you move into other like higher, like more recent advances. So AI, ML, deep learning, IoT, and you can also see AR and VR. And so those can be used, IoT can be used in, I don't know, they're like smart refrigerators now where they can track what is in your refrigerator and then they can go ahead and buy stuff for you. AR and VR is being used a lot for planning and like just training people of how to use their finances like in a more engaging way for people to interact with their finances. Yeah.
Cool. So in terms of growth in fintech, there's a lot of different trends that we'll probably be talking about throughout the entire presentation that highlight kind of where there is room to grow in the fintech space. A really good measurement of just seeing like how other people are kind of viewing the fintech industry is kind of highlighted here with venture capital, private equity, and merger and acquisition. Sort of trends. Those are all pretty much fancy words of saying there's a lot of money coming in to the fintech industry. So one that you can kind of really see on the right side of the graph is the early VC one. You see an especially large increase over time. But between pretty much all of the different categories, you'll see that they're increasing really, really quickly, especially in the last 4 or 5 years. there's a lot of different companies that, especially in the public eye, that you started hearing about more and more. Some of the big ones are Robinhood, Plaid, Credit Karma, and there's even more that you haven't heard about that kind of run the entire financial system in the background, whether it's for a lot of the big banking companies, or if it's for things as simple as Stripe, which Stripe isn't that simple, but it runs all of the, credit card or any processing payments on, like, for example, a website. And there's a lot of different areas there. Additionally, there's a lot of international expansion. So for example, Square is a big company that handles processing for a lot of small businesses. They're looking into continents like Africa. That's a huge industry. Robinhood has a opportunity to provide investments internationally. So there's a lot of room to kind of expand the same type of industry into the international sphere. It's kind of similar to how
Uh-oh.
Oh, it happens.
you see that a lot outside, like, for example, in Southeast Asia. You'll see a lot of different companies like, is my internet unstable?
It was a little bit. You're good now.
Okay. But there's a lot of powerhouse fintech companies internationally. A lot of common ones are Alipay, WeChat in China, and there's even more. Especially there's M-Pesa in Kenya. There's a large fintech community in African countries as well.
Yeah, and so this is just a list of all the different companies that are available for you to look into if you want to get into fintech. And just like I wanted to add this on a quick note, like I think a lot of people also look into like hedge funds, prop trading firms as part of fintech. And it's kind of like a fine line where, like, personally, I don't really consider them fintech, but obviously they're technology, and they leverage a lot of technology in their companies. So those are also some examples. I mean, I just list them out, like Citadel, Jane Street, Two Sigma, are a lot of the more technology-facing firms in that sector. And yeah, so that was just a really brief introduction. We really wanted to make this more personal and go through, I guess, like more of a panel style where a lot of the information we just shared, you can probably find it online, but we wanted to see what, we just wanted to share with you guys our personal experiences, as we feel that's more just like insightful to how the industry actually goes. And so, yeah, I guess we're gonna go through each of these questions through, like, me, Simran, G, Harry will answer them one at a time. And yeah, if you guys have any questions in the audience, feel free to interrupt at any time. And yeah, so Simran, you want to start off with what it's like to work an intern in fintech?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the big things that I kind of noticed while being in the space is that despite a lot of the new companies that are coming out there, a lot of the very, very core infrastructure for the entire pretty much financial system is like really old, and it's really outdated, and it's very painful to use for a lot of companies that are built on top of that. And so you'll see a lot of legacy system integration. There's 4 or 5 different core providers. There's a lot of messiness, very hard to document, very outdated technology that can get really painful to use, which is why there's so much opportunity here, because it's such a big pain point for a lot of different companies, and it's a very big hassle. So there's a lot of legacy systems that are painfully used. That's one thing that I've kind of seen around. Another thing is that there's a lot of hype and optimism and excitement around these industries, for better or for worse. You'll kind of catch yourself in that kind of atmosphere. Another thing is there's a really exciting sense of scale in the fintech industry that is very hard to catch in different types of industries, even that are tech related. Usually any problem that you solve for a particular segment or customer can kind of be abstracted into larger and larger opportunities, and that's particularly true for fintech. So that's also generally very exciting.
What about you, G?
Yeah, so from my end, yeah, I definitely think some of the trends that Simran noted is very true. From Robinhood, it's pretty interesting because we kind of sit at a place that's, you know, we're known for being a fintech company, but Robinhood's also known for being like a very like forefront consumer company. So that's pretty interesting. And I think of fintech as kind of like a very like high risk, high reward space. Like the problems are very, very complex because there's a lot of like technologically complex problems in terms of like, you know, how to move so much money around all at once with software and like all the data surrounding it. But yeah, I think it's a very, it's interesting because I think I think knowledge in the area helps, but I don't think it's necessary. Like the people I work with, some of them came from no finance background at all, whereas some others were literally like worked in hedge funds before. So there's a variety of like experience in terms of like people's finance backgrounds. But it's a pretty cool space. Yeah, it's a pretty spicy space that's continuing to grow a lot.
Another thing I want to throw in this is asking y'all, what does your day-to-day look like when you're working and interning in fintech?
Yeah, I mean, I can pick up with from G and also answer that as well. I think on a day-to-day, I would say, at least on my end as a software engineer, I would say it's not very different from working at any other like FANG company, Facebook, Google, any one of those where you have a product. And in my case, it's more internal clients. So they're using the platforms that a lot of the engineers are building up. Whereas like for them, they're like at Facebook, it's pretty obvious. They have like Facebook, you know, but I'm sure they also have internal clients that they're making, they're providing services for. But yeah, so it's not really that different in terms of what like the broad idea of what you're doing. But I think one aspect that I really enjoy is that on the day to day, I also have to understand the finance and the like the econ stuff behind it. So like for me right now, I'm building like a platform that helps like traders and other like, so like traders and like securities strats, those are like the quants at Goldman, how to help them price or like to help them allocate IPOs and shares for people. And so I have to understand the whole like timeline of when an IPO comes, when a client indicates some interest for the IPO, that like how that entire process moves from the sales side to the pricing side and back to the sales side. And so I guess also like last summer when I interned, I built like an options pricing platform. So I had to understand all the different strategies for options. So you really get into like alongside using computer science and software engineering. I feel like fintech gives you the opportunity to touch and understand just another area, which I really enjoy. And yeah, so to echo Simran as well, especially at these large banks, a lot of the systems are legacy. But so like right now, one product I'm working on is pretty old. I have no idea how it works, but that's what I'm learning to do. But also a lot of these banks, if not all of them, are moving towards using more modern system, like more, I guess, more modern stacks. So like React, Angular, stuff like that. So I think a lot of people are scared because they don't want to touch legacy systems, but I think at least the banking industry is moving away from that. Yeah. And Harry, do you have anything to add in?
Yeah, I would just say that it's like very fast paced. Like if you think about all these like new fintech companies that have emerged out, like they've grown incredibly fast. So I would want to point out that that's also something that happens a lot. Like, and technology also improves like as we move like year by year. And so in terms of like the technical aspect and like the different offerings that come up and segments that the fintech tries to tackle, like it's pretty fast. Um, but in terms like of the work that I do, if you are kind of interested, it's more like it like mirrors what Simran was talking about. Like a lot of the particularly government wise, the systems are really outdated. Like for example, you look at how COVID has hit the government, especially like how they're trying to implement a lot of their policies. It's really shown that a lot of their systems are really outdated. So a lot of the work that my company focuses on consulting wise is to help them adapt their current systems and do analysis for them. So it's fast paced, and at the same time, like you're also dealing with like older systems and trying to improve and adapt to those. So I think that that's like kind of encapsulates my kind of day to day for that sense. Um, but the one thing that you got to take away from that is that everything that's going on in some sense is trying to improve what's existing. Um, and so like the trends are all positive is what I want to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
G and Simran, do you guys want to add anything else onto like what you're doing on a day to day?
No, not particularly. I think I'm good. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
All right, let's move on to the next question, which is why should students be interested in fintech? What particularly stands out to you as why you like fintech, why you work in fintech, and why students should as well?
Yeah, I can go first, I guess. I think we all talked about a lot of this in just answering the first question. But for me, I really like the fact that I'm not just looking at software and computer science all day. Um, I really like the fact that I get to learn about something else in addition to computer science and how it's so closely intertwined with what I'm doing every single day. And another aspect that at least I'm excited about, and I think that you guys should be excited about too, are all of the new technologies that are being used in fintech. So for example, so like for me, in like at Duke, I took a lot of like machine learning classes. It's a pretty big deal nowadays, and I think machine learning is definitely a growing aspect of fintech. So if you take like 10 years, so in fintech, a lot of people are, I guess, not as up to date because they don't necessarily trust these models, stuff like that. But I think as time has passed, more people have realized the usefulness of machine learning, and I think it's slowly being incorporated more into fintech. And I think that goes for a lot of different technologies. But I I'm just really interested in seeing how these different methods are or will be put into use in this industry. And so like in machine learning specifically, in other industries, like you see like Alexa, you see a lot of CV stuff. They've been using it for several years now very successfully, but machine learning, it hasn't been that huge in fintech, at least in, I'd say at least in like modeling and in quant work. They're more like systemic traders rather than like I would say like using these machine learning models, but it's definitely a growing field in that aspect, which I'm excited for.
Yeah, I can. I think there's two particular things about fintech that are super interesting. I think one is that it's almost a huge pain point for pretty much anyone. Like in 99% of industries, there's probably some fintech related problem that's like a huge pain for them. And so the opportunities for problems are just absurd, and they're usually a big deal. So that's always cool. And I think the other thing that's been particularly interesting has been that there's always kind of been this problem like on the very foundation with the financial system. And on most days, most years, most decades, you kind of get by ignoring it. But I think the whole COVID pandemic and all of that has kind of shown a light on a lot of the problems. There's been huge issues with actually giving out the payment. There's a huge bureaucracy involved, and it highlights there's a lot of problems for small businesses receiving the money, understanding from the government's perspective who got the money and being more transparent about that. And even then, just internally, how a company manages their own financials. There's like a huge kind of array of problems that have been kind of highlighted. And so that's makes the next 10, 15 years even more exciting as most of these problems will be kind of on the forefront of people's minds.
Yeah. I think I talked about this earlier, but I think again, it's like a very like high risk, high reward sort of space, in the sense that like there's just it's so powerful. Like you're combining the combination of like finance and like technology is just, it's very fascinating. It's very complex because there's a lot of money being moved around. And I'm working on problems where like I'm learning new like knowledge in the fintech like domain, which I felt like I wouldn't have learned otherwise if I was working in like a in some other software company that was less fintech oriented or just more soft in general. So I think there's a lot of really cool knowledge to be picked up. Like at my company, every bi-weekly, we do like a investing 101 session where we talk about like different things about like investing. Like we talked about like our head of finance talked about bonds, like our co-founder Vlad talked about high frequency trading, etc. It's just really, really fascinating. And I think if you're interested in, kind of like both sides, just falls so well into like the intersection of like finance and tech.
Yeah, like going off what they said, like G and Simran, like there are a lot of problems that like come up when like fintech companies are trying to do something new or like improve something. And that also requires a lot of domain knowledge. But at the same time, like it's really cool to see how like you can utilize the things that you've learned in school maybe or beyond to like solve these problems. So to give like an example, like my first project that I got put onto was looking at student aid loans and like how the pandemic has impacted the effects that the government wanted to implement. So like putting everyone into forbearance and so on. And so it's like you needed the domain knowledge of like how loans work, especially for the student loans, and like how the government interacts with these as like a banker itself, because they actually own all of the, or like 90% of the loans that are existing right now. And so then you apply like what you've learned so far, like in statistics or CS, and it's kind of cool to see that intersection of like the stuff that you've learned before, like tech wise, and then applied to this new space in finance if you didn't previously have knowledge in that regard. So it's like, for me, what interests me the most is being able to utilize what I've learned before, as well as like learning new ways to implement what I learned before.
Thanks, y'all. All right, we'll head into the next question, which is, what does a FinTech interview actually look like? Can you tell us a little bit about what your FinTech interviews have looked like, just a quick recap, and how you would recommend people prepare for similar interviews on this call? Well, let's start with Calvin again.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us are going to echo the same idea, but I think a FinTech interview is really not very different from any other, in my case, at least like a software engineering interview. G mentioned this a little bit, but I think in a lot of these companies, you're not really expected to know a lot of finance knowledge or econ knowledge coming in, especially if you're more on the tech side. and it's something that you're going to pick up, you're going to have to learn on the job, which I think is exciting. You might not like it as much, but I think it's exciting. But in general, I don't think you need to prepare for it any differently. On the quant side, it's definitely a little bit different. You'll have like probability theory questions. Like you'll also have like your classic coding questions, but definitely more math, more probability on that side.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think, I think most of the time the interviews are effectively the same as regular software engineering interviews. Maybe they've like kind of been warped into like a fintech like context, but generally they're the same problems. I think one thing that is almost related that you'll find is that most fintech companies are generally like on the newer side, and they're more entrepreneurial in spirit. So you'll most likely be asked questions or be put in environments that are way more outside of the computer science realm than most other software engineering companies. So that would mean things like having a better understanding of like the consumer, having a better understanding about what makes a big product or what makes a good product, and just kind of being a little bit more well-rounded, it seems. That's just kind of something I've seen or I've noticed in fintech companies more than others. That may just be my experience.
That makes sense. G, what have you noticed in your interviews?
Yeah, I think both what Calvin and Simon said are also like my observations. And I think I talked about this earlier. Like there's, people, you don't need to have a finance knowledge to go into fintech. Like if you do, great. If you don't, that's totally fine. So yeah, my interviews, basically the type of questions looked exactly the same as all of the other tech companies that I interviewed for. They were all just like consumer focused, or like more product consumer focused. And like literally like in my interview, I got like my interviewer asked me, he was like, how familiar are you with the Robinhood platform? I'm like, I trade on it. Why? And he's like, well, just to be safe, I'll ask you a question about Netflix. Or sorry, he asked me, ask you a question about Spotify instead of Robinhood for your product intuition question. So yeah, known domain knowledge required.
My interview experience was actually a little bit different. So I was given like a case study to do, and I had to tackle it from like a data analysis perspective. So it was like kind of like, here's a problem, like how would you solve it, and then present your solutions. So it was kind of like a case study, but it was more like on the tech side. Domain knowledge was like, it would be nice to have if you understood like the different economic like movements that caused the problem that I was looking into, but it definitely wasn't required. And like it was like kind of like a more open-ended tech question. There was like no specific right or wrong answer to this question. It was like specifically meant to be open-ended to see your creativity and like how you would tackle a question that doesn't necessarily have a right answer. So try and be a little bit more open, out of the box a little bit. But yeah, like try and rely on the things that you know.
That makes sense. All right, at this point, I think we should open up for a Q&A from our audience members. So if anybody has a question, go ahead and pop it in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask our panelists.
Don't be shy.
I'll start off with one, just to get us warmed up, which is, if you could go back and give yourself any advice about going into the fintech space, what would that be? That could be ahead of interviews, that could be ahead of your job. Simran, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would tell myself is that it's really easy to think of industries as like pretty well defined and like kind of set in stone, not that much room for improvement. Or if there is improvement, that someone else is likely doing it. Um, but there's a very clear way of kind of building the future that you think can exist. And to always remember that, especially in fintech, but I think this really applies to anything. Um, but, uh, but I think it's really that if you can kind of imagine a better way of doing things, that you can probably make it happen. It may be tough, but there is a way to do it, and to always remember that, as opposed to being very satisfied with the way that things currently are, or that believing that maybe another company is already kind of solving this and it's like a fine way or something like that. There's always something to kind of improve on, and that you as an individual do have that ability to do that.
I think one piece of advice that I've received that has stood out to me is, and I mean, this can play into any industry, not just fintech, but I think especially in fintech, is as like someone in technology, as like a software engineer, it's really important to understand the business side of things. I know it's easy for like us in tech to like make fun of the business side, but when your clients are people working in finance, and when you're in fintech, I think the ability to understand like exactly what your platforms are going to be doing, why your clients are using your platform, how exactly they're going to be using your platform, and just understanding from start to finish what's going to be used for something that you're making. I think it's like, well, they told me this, but I also think that it's really, really important and something that you have to keep in mind. And it's, I guess, it's not really a piece of advice that I go back and give myself, but I think it's a piece of advice that it's gonna stay with me moving forwards.
That makes a lot of sense. G, do you have any advice you'd give your former self?
I think mostly just like, again, I said that like domain knowledge is not necessary, but I think at the same time, if you do have like time and interest to like look into that space and know a little bit more, that always comes in handy. So like, I remember when like basically in March when like the market dipped like crazy, I kind of did more research into like the market and like all that sort of stuff. And I found that it was,
Buy Tesla?
huh?
Did you buy Tesla when the market crashed?
No, I didn't. But yeah, I feel like having some knowledge is like helpful, because I think it helps you understand your space better, but also like, you know, it's also something like in fintech, yeah, people like to talk about like fintech outside of, you know, just work as well. So that's also a fun thing to kind of have like commonality, and for you to have something to talk about with your coworkers as well, casual, whether that's like inside or sorry, at work or outside of work. Yeah.
Harry.
Yeah, to like build on what they've mentioned before, like one thing I would have wanted to do more is to like pay attention to the tech world and like what new tech developments are going on. Like it's pretty easy to get lost in like what the new technical trend is, or like what the new thing that all the companies are trying to implement because it saves them time and whatnot. So like I wish I paid more attention to that. Not entirely sure how I would, like maybe new Medium articles or whatnot, but like that would be something that I would want to, that I wish I had focused more on. But in terms of like other advice that I wish I had, it would be like to what Calvin mentioned, like understanding like the business side, because sometimes when you're tackling a problem, you might think, oh, this is the best solution, but it might not be the best solution for everyone. So having like an idea in mind of like when you're solving a problem, you're solving it for someone, especially like client wise, like having that kind of mindset when you approach a problem. Yeah.
That's good to hear. All right. Any other questions from the audience?
I have
Again,
a question for Harry.
if you want to ask a question, just unmute yourself and ask. And if you're camera shy, just put it in the chat and we'll be sure to answer it.
Harry, can you talk about your master's in fintech and like your limited experience so far, but your classes, what you've noticed?
Yeah, what's it like?
Yeah, just for you. So I enrolled at the start of the summer, and so I've only taken one class completely, which was like programming for finance, which was really interesting, kind of eye-opening. It was like all in C++, trying to build your like foundational knowledge of what is the fastest compilable code. But in terms of the classes that I'm taking right now, they're pretty interesting. One of them is financial analysis. So it's more like geared towards the quant kind of pathway. And then the other one is machine learning in finance. Again, kind of like building on that kind of quant path, so you can kind of see where I'm considering in going into. And like the two like takeaways that I've taken from the class is more just like you want to be like, or not necessarily ahead of the industry, because that's kind of hard to do, but like at least aware of what's prevalent right now. And from there trying to figure out like, okay, they're doing this, here are different technologies that are available. Is it possible to do this into that to maybe be better or faster or smarter in any sense? And like that's the one thing that the two classes are trying to drill in, is that like it's one thing to learn the material and just like be able to drone off and repeat that in like the industry, but if you want to like make some form of change, you have to like try and think a little bit outside of the box. Like here are different technologies that exist that aren't being applied, but can it be? And those are like two important key factors that I'm kind of thinking about a little more now.
All right, we'll stick around for some more questions. Again, just feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or just put it in the chat and we'll answer it.
If not, I think the trends question was kind of cool. What are the trends that I don't think?
Yeah, I would like to hear y'all's takes on that. Hot takes, if any.
I can go. I think a lot. I think it's more common for a lot of these big banks, I guess, since I'm more in that area, these banks and other like older companies to start having like collaborations with these new hip companies, or like buying them out. So for example, at Goldman, they recently like paired with Apple to come up with their Apple Card, which is pretty cool. I've heard that the Apple Card, like, yeah, I guess the Apple Card is pretty good, but just like, I can't think of any other ones off the top of my head, but there's just that sense of like collaboration and wanting to be at the forefront of the industry that the fintech world is really chasing after.
Wait, but also like, because I remember when that came out, that Apple's credit card was like the only one where you could see your like cash back daily, as opposed to like, at the end of every billing cycle. So
Yeah.
that was something that was kind of interesting to see. Like you could get your cash back right away if you needed it.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think, yeah, the Apple Card is like emphasizes transparency a lot. And so that's like one of the features that it has. And I mean, a lot of these companies are like creating extra features to stay relevant and to be noticed.
Simran, is that along the lines of what you've been seeing?
Yeah, I think Goldman is actually particularly like cognizant of this. I think they also I think they bought out a company called, I think this was Goldman, was Marcus, which is like focused solely on like younger people, and being like the debit card for younger people is a little bit more trendy for mobile banking app. I'm not sure how well it caught on, but I know that was like a big investment on Goldman's part.
Well, it's like their own. It's basically Goldman's consumer bank. It's like their like completely digital consumer bank. And yeah, I mean they also have like ACO, which is their like financial advice, where like if a company wants to use ACO services, they give like financial advice, like advisory services to the employees at the company, stuff like that. And yeah, I mean Marcus is also very popular. I wouldn't be surprised if some people like a lot of people are starting to use Marcus. Apparently, it's basically like in the UK, they're telling people that they can't take their money anymore, which is cool.
Yeah, I think it's like more of like an outcome of, I think, this overarching trend of like financial inclusion is what I've heard it be called. Is that more and more companies are trying to go for what are known as the underbanked communities, and that just means like the simplest examples of underbanked communities are the ones that are actually unbanked, that don't even have a bank account. Or underbanked would include like maybe they have a bank account but they don't have like an investment portfolio that's like managed, or maybe even don't even have a credit card, or like low to no credit score, things like that. So there's, I think there's, and many people are underbanked. I think if I remember correctly, it's like 50 million people in the US, which is, I think, probably about like a seventh of the population now. So that includes like teenagers, or young adults that just don't even have bank accounts, or like older people who distrust the system or something like that. There's like this huge trend of financial inclusion where more and more large institutions want to reach out to people who have often been overlooked by society in the banking industry. So I think that's a pretty big one. And I think the other one is like around the strategies of these companies. I think more and more companies are becoming, I don't know if it's vertically integrated or horizontally integrated. It's one or the other. I guess it depends on what you draw the picture as, because I guess it can be either. But it's like more and more companies are doing the same thing. So for example, Robinhood has a checking account, which they've recently opened. Square, which started as like a point of sale system, like when you go to like a small business and you like swipe your card, the technology powering a lot of that is like Square as an example, and they've started lending money to small businesses. They started bank accounts for small businesses, as an example. I'm sure there's like even more. Let me think. Some Venmo and PayPal existed for consumers, and then Zelle came out of the actual banks. So they're providing that service, peer-to-peer transfer within their own system. More and more companies are like, and banks actually really are providing like automated investment savings, fighting like Acorn and Stash, which are generally their own companies. Like we really see like a lot of different industries becoming features instead of industries on their own. So I think that's been I think that has been crazy. Actually, it's been pretty wild. And once you kind of notice it, you'll see it everywhere. Like everyone is now giving out checking accounts. Everyone is doing like investments and savings and like that. So those are, I think, the two big ones that I've seen.
Harry, I noticed you nodding your head a lot during that. Do you have any additional thoughts?
Yeah. So like the what was that term that you mentioned earlier? Like the bringing everyone together.
Yeah, I say financial inclusion. I'm not actually sure if that's what most people say.
Honestly, I feel like that's a pretty good way to say it. Like, I mean, if you think about it, right? Like Marcus, Charles Schwab, Robinhood, these are all like institutions that are letting you trade stocks with like zero commission, right? And like that in and of itself is like basically trying to, you know, have that financial inclusion, like allowing people that usually wouldn't think about trying to trade stocks do that, especially with like without those fees. And like and what I mentioned earlier with like retirement savings accounts, like Charles Schwab and Marcus are like leading kind of that space where they're allowing you to personalize what you want to do, as opposed to having someone like up there managing your stuff, charging you dumb fees for like moving just a little bit of money every year. And so like these are trends that I think are really cool to see. I wonder what will happen later on, like if they will continue to coexist, like all three of those together. Obviously, like they do have slightly different targeted audiences, but it's kind of interesting to see how they're able to have like what you could argue is very similar products. And like you also have Webull as well coming out of the groundworks to let you trade fractional shares now as well. And like that's kind of crazy to see like all of these improvements, especially in like this personal finance and like financial inclusion kind of stage. So that's what I'm really excited about, like having that kind of ability to do, you know, what you want. Oh, it does? Sick. But yeah, like the other day I was looking at like some finance posts, and there's this one person who shared like insane plays from the from Tesla's like skyrocketing boom. And so he traded options on his Roth IRA, which are tax-free gains, since like you put in money after tax already. So he managed to make like 2,000 in his returns. Like obviously it was a really risky play, but the point that I wanted to get across is that he managed to pocket all of those like returns without any tax, just because he was able to do that on his Roth IRA through a like brokerage account that allowed him to do that individually, which is kind of ridiculous. And he didn't have to pay any obscene fees on that. Yeah, so that's what I find kind of exciting to see now.
And I think this is like a really good note to end on. First is don't trade options. Put your money in ETFs. Options are very risky. Second is I think the most exciting thing about fintech are all of these advances that we've talked about. And I think a lot of the times in the news, you're hearing about these advances in the financial world for technology, whereas I think we like to think of those big companies like Amazon, Facebook. I think we like to think of them at the forefront of technology, but I think more often you're hearing about advances in the fintech space. And I mean, we've mentioned so many, not just huge developments, but just more minute changes and movements forward in the fintech sphere that make it so exciting. And I think just getting the opportunity to experience it and work on these products is just very I don't know what a better word. It's just very exciting.
All right, so as Calvin said, I think that's an awesome note to end on. We've run up on time exactly. So thank you all again for joining us. Thank you, Simran G, Calvin, Harry, for talking about your experience. Seriously, seriously valuable. Thank you so much for your help.
Well, happy to be here, Nathan. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right, y'all. Until next time.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.